So we left off last videos. We've got our home page here, and we can see a list of values. And now what we need to do is the exact same thing for the to-do. So hopefully you had some success going off of the model that we've already created here. So let's go ahead and take a look at values, and we're basically going to do the same thing here with our to-dos. So I'm going to copy that and make a new file called todos.js. Got our to-dos there. And we'll have for each to-do, we're going to just return an H3 of the to-do. It comes from the collection. Whoop. There we go. All right, so that should get the job done for us there in the component. All right, the GET request is a default, right? This is a flexible function for all of our different GET requests, so we don't have to change anything there. And so now we can go in our app and just utilize that. So we have nav values, we can copy that, and we can do nav to-dos. So we have the to-dos button, which clearly selects nav to-dos, and we got to make sure that that's the right endpoint there. So what I can do is inspect my to-dos, and I have a class called nav to-dos. Notice it's all lowercase here. Okay. I kind of like keeping that D capitalized, so I think I want to change that in the nav. That's the header. Make this a capital D. Let's keep everything consistent here. Sort of. That's where I'm thinking my camel case should be. So. Good thing we checked that out, because that would have been an issue right there, right? So that's a good match. Well, actually, I don't like to do camel case in my class name, so I'm going to leave it. At least we're being deliberate about what it is that we want to do. I'm going to leave it. As long as there's a match there, right? Okay. So we've got the to-dos button. And our GET request is going to change here. And so we've got to grab this one. Oh, all the things I added from the React app are still there because I hadn't stopped the server since then. So I don't know. Let me make a fresh start here. Since we don't have any removals built in, we'll rerun this server with our data as the original. There we go. Same endpoint, just has the original 3 items in it. So that's our location. Then our callback will be all of the to-dos, which we will query select in the app again, except this time we're going to bring in our component for the to-dos. And we'll bring all of those items in. All right, there we go. And we're not utilizing this function yet. And so let's go ahead and do that. And we probably have to bring in the to-dos component as well, right? So we'll import that. All right. So now we should be able to see our app change the state from home to the values and to the to-dos whenever we so choose. So you can kind of pause the video there if you need to really look closely at that function. Let me scroll through here and show you again from the top. There's our imports, our addition to the page build function, and right now we've got our header and our footer, our nav home, which has our first click event, and then our nav values and our nav to-dos, which look very, very similar to each other at this point. Let's call it the localhost 1234. All right, there's our home, there's our values, and there's our to-dos. We can inspect. We're not throwing any errors or anything. The good news is it's working, but just to make sure there's nothing being thrown in there, and we can hop back and forth right through our application. So you can see the beauty of this single page app, fast, clean. No refreshes taking place, nothing like what your MVC projects were doing with the redirects. Okay, and we are going to do one more step in this process because we do have in our API here, we have this post request. And so my post request is returning a collection of the items. This is called all, and so this is the collection of to-dos that we see here, and I want to be able to add to this just like we did in our React app. So we're going to do the same thing here in our with our to-dos in our parcel front end. So let's go ahead and head back to our to-dos component, because the first thing we need is an actual form in order to be able to have the user enter this information. So I want to stay above my template literal that closes here, above my backtick, and I want to go ahead and create a section with a class called add to do. And within this section, I want a input field. And that will be the to-do name, and that's going to be entered in as text. And we'll put a placeholder in here so that there's some instructions to the user on what to do. So we can add a to-do. And that's our input field. And now let's go ahead and put a submit button here too. So we'll do an add to-do submit. And there's our button, and we'll go ahead and close off our section. Okay, so that should be our form that we need to interact with. And let's go ahead and make sure that that actually renders properly here. And so there it is. So we should be able to put something in here. Now, obviously, right now, we don't have any submissions or any triggers going on. It's just existing there. So there's not even a click event on that submit button. So it's just there, and it's sitting there. So we'll have to come back to that and build it out. So let's talk a little bit more about fetch. So fetch can accept two parameters. The first is always going to be the endpoint, which was all we needed for our GET request. But we do need a little bit more here when we deal with the details on the post. And so that second optional parameter is the initialization object. So this is the object we can pass with some configuration settings. Most of the time we're going to be dealing with method. And by default, the method is get. So we didn't have to do that on the GET request because that's a default. So we are going to specify the method on the post request to be a post. Our headers, we want to make sure that we have a content type of application JSON, because we need to take this string, parse it as JSON so that it can be able to talk to both ends of our application. And then the body will stringify our request. And so diving into those a little bit more here. Talks about the method. By default get, we are going to create a get if we were going to, or a post, I'm sorry, if we were going to delete, it would obviously be delete. And this talks a little bit about headers, which are sent before we get any request or response. They're just metadata about this request or the response that we're sending. They describe what the content will be. And this is important for us to make sure that we're bringing back the JSON that we want. The body, probably the most important one here, and this is what allows us to grab that data and send it back to the server. All right, and this is the same behavior that we see in the request body of forms, and we have to kind of just make sure that our controller is talking nicely with this. And here's a good example of a post request. And so ours are going to basically look strikingly similar here, the way we set up our fetches. All right, and so let's go ahead in and kind of deal with this here in our code. So we have a function for a post request. And very similar location. One extra piece, we need a request body. All right, this will be what we place into the input field of the form, and then we have our callback. All right, so let's deal with a fetch that has a location again, and then that optional second parameter, which is going to be an object. And so we'll specify that with these curly braces here in JavaScript. And the method, as we said before, the default is get, so we are changing this to be a post. The body, we want to take this string and JSON stringify it from our input field. Our request body there, and our headers. Okay, content type. I want to use application /JSON. And then I believe we can just take everything that we've got up here and throw it down as well. All right, so that's going to go under here. Okay, that should be our post request. And let's go ahead and export that. Notice it's not being referenced yet. So we've now got our post request. So this post request happens in the app.js. It happens in that same nav, that nav for our to-dos. So we need to be inside of that same area of our application here as we're going through this. So something that you're going to see here is I'm going to actually repeat some code here, which we could maybe even extract into a variable if we wanted, or its own function. But let's go ahead and we'll deal with that. We can refactor later. Let's go ahead and come underneath the get request there, and let's go ahead and start building this out. So here's an example of some repetitive code that we see inside of this function that we can pull out into a variable, and that is the query selecting of the app right there. So we're going to add an event listener here. And we'll build out a function for that. So now what we're doing is we're looking inside of our div. And I want to know if this div here, right, when I'm home, here's our div. Here's our values, there's that div. Here's our to-dos. Here's that div, including that form. I want to look for when the div has a class containing this submit button, or when the div contains this submit button. So I'm looking for that class. So what I'm basically doing is looking for when does the div contain this button here, which I can find with this class. Okay, that's the only time that I really care to run this function. This part of the function is when I actually see that that submit button is there in the div. All right. So what we're going to do is if event.target.classList contains the add-to-do-submit class. I think I need to make sure, yeah, that looks good. I don't need the dot when I'm using contains. Then what do we want to do? We want to create a variable for this to do. And we can basically grab that off of the input field. Now let's console log that and see what happens. I want to see if I can get that to do to come back, that my form is recognizing that. So in the event that my app contains this submit button, let me look for the input field here. So I'm looking for that input field, and I want to store the input field's value in a variable called to do. So I want to see if this actually does what we're expecting it to do. So let's take a look at our console here. And let's see, write code. And when I hit that submit button, nothing quite is happening yet on that. So I think might have to revisit some things there. So I'm not sure if it's just because I'm unfinished with that. I might have left some things open here, so I've got to be careful to see what's going on. So let's go ahead and finish it out. I was hoping to get a response there, but it doesn't look like it's coming through at the moment. All right. Let's go ahead and do our post request. Let's keep the location of our to-dos. Again, same location. Now we have this to-do variable here, so we're going to bring it in as our response body. And then for our callback, it's going to be very similar to what we see here. We should be able to bring this same callback in. Close this off here. All right, let's take a look at what happens with this. All right, so we're not getting a response here, and so we need to figure out and dig into what's going on. It's also concerning that we're not even getting an error happening here, and I'm not even seeing any errors here in the application. So that's definitely a little bit strange that we're not getting any sort of trigger here. So let's dig into what's happening. Wow, seeing an issue right here where I did not even have my, oops, I take single quotes on my classes. So my classes weren't even there, so that's why I wasn't getting any sort of response happening. I had forgotten the opening quote on my classes. So now I've got what I need over here. So now I should at least get a response even if it throws me an error. Okay, so the good news is when you first click on ToDos, it's still, the GET request is working, so let's go ahead and throw that in there. So this is great. So we're getting an issue here. Cannot read property value of null at 61. And what file are we looking at here? We're looking at the app file, and we're looking at 61. So you might have shortened the code so it doesn't like this right here. And so if I was console log this, or to do in this case, I don't think we get that far to even see what's happening. Let's say 55. So now it's actually saying the right spot. Before it wasn't. Yep, and it's exactly right here. So this this variable is coming back null. So this is where our issue is. So we're going to have to take a look at what's happening here. Looks like I'm going to have to put the dot in here because I'm query selecting this, and when I query select a class, I need the dot operator. So that should move us through that issue. And we should step a little further. All right, so now we're getting that this event.target.parent element query selector is .value, whatever that would be in there. .value is not a function, so we need to dig into what's happening with that. It's interesting here, we can even just make sure that we're finding the existence of our submit button. And we can go ahead and put this little log statement in there. As you see in this is a rather complicated section of code, so it's good to kind of step through. Let's make sure we can find this class. All right. So let's see if we can get this text to show up. So it should not show up when I do home. Shouldn't show up when I do values. Shouldn't show up when I just use the GET request here on my ToDos, right? Because notice that is going to be happening below this GET request. So it is going to be happening when I actually click. Okay, so let's see what happens there. And the good news is that submit button is found on click. So I'm diving in and digging in pretty good there. So everything up until this line 56 is good. And it looks like I just the dot value is what I want here, but I don't want the parentheses. So I just want to do dot value to grab that value. So now we can console log that to do and see what comes back to us. And you see it comes back, and it is also added into our database. So I go home, values, ToDos, add groceries. We can take a look at our API on the back end and refresh it, and notice those items are added in. And so we are now successfully working, and we're up and running. So there's lots of different options you could do here with this to-do list at this point. You could put little X buttons by each of these, right? And then that could be your delete. So you could go in and write a delete method in the back end, and then build out some functionality to do like an on-click for delete. But we're good to go. So we have a fully functioning single-page application here that can do GET requests and POST requests. So let me go through and show you that change that we made. So we did the GET request here now in our API-actions.javascript file, and we have our POST request. And don't forget to export those. And then we just dove into the to-dos. We had to add a section there that could control the form submission. So be very careful about your class names there. As you can see from me, I got tripped up a little bit with that on this one. And then we went ahead and in our nav to-dos function, below our GET request, we created our POST request. And so basically the whole workflow of this project here that we can see is we've got a JavaScript folder and we've got an index.html page. So there's our original initial index.html page. And then within JavaScript we have an API folder to control those GET and POST request actions. You could put the delete request in there as well. And then we have our components. So our components for this project, our footer, our header, our home, to-dos, and values. Okay? And then our app.js is sitting outside of that. App.js is really driving out the functionality of what's happening here in this application. And we're controlling that here with our page builds. So the very last video that I'm going to do is to show you how to handle your CSS.